Good morning, afternoon, evening, tech law lovers. Very warm welcome to another session of Hot Briefings with Takeoff. We are extremely excited and we are extremely honored to bring you yet another very exciting topic to talk about. I am Vishwaroop and I am here joining with my co-host Debarshi. Um, on where in this for this hot briefing where we essentially speak on strategies to handle key legal issues which are faced by a technology company, and here we essentially go ahead and speak with the who's who of the technology law world. So hello Debarshi, good evening to you.
Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, Vishwaroop.
So joining us today is Kevin Keller. Now, Kevin Keller is one who spearheads legal at adept.ai. For a lot of us in the technology law world, he's a very well known name. But I'm just going to give a short introduction of Kevin Keller to people who are joining us and getting to know us a little better. Kevin Keller is an attorney with a rich blend of expertise at the confluence of law, business, and technology. His career spans significant roles that he has played. Um, he has played in Amazon, Microsoft, and then he has advised on multiple cutting-edge technology issues, including AI. So I would like to give a very warm welcome to Kevin, and I would like to thank Kevin for joining us today. And hereby, please welcome Kevin Keller to the uh, podcast. Hi, Kevin. We are super excited to have you here today on this
Hi,
morning.
Kevin.
Yeah.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right. Thanks, Vishwaroop. Thanks for getting us all together. Really excited. And today we're going to speak about licensing terms of AI, and who better than Kevin to enlighten us, with his vast experience in this domain. But before we get started, Kevin, can you tell a little bit about yourself and give a little glimpse of your experience to our viewers?
Yeah, sure. I tell people I am an electrical engineer who went to the dark side and became an attorney. I graduated from law school and went to work for Wilson Sonsini, which is a well-known technology law firm in Silicon Valley, in their technology transactions group, which is uh, focused on commercial transactions involving intellectual property, but also kind of holistically advised clients on everything regulatory and privacy and all of that as it came up. So some of the world's first, if you will, product counsel came from that. I've worked at semiconductor companies like Micron, so very familiar with that space, and then have worked for Microsoft on various things, Amazon for 11 and a half years, Instacart, Facebook. I was most recently the general counsel of a company called Super, and now am a legal team of first full-time legal person at Adept AI. I've been advising on issues around AI probably for 15 or 20 years. It's been around for a long time. I think that most of us know the most famous examples are search algorithms and Netflix's recommendation algorithms, but there's lots of other stuff behind the scenes that bigger companies have done to train models. I think everyone's gotten very excited over the past year and a half or so now that we have large language models that are available more to the public. And I've been involved a little bit with advising on that. And certainly here at Adept, what we do is we are creating a large language models, multimodal models, not making them available to the public, but using them to power agents, which is sort of the next iteration of what's going to happen in AI, is to have autonomous agents that can do back office type of work for you that are powered by AI. So that's my background and experience, and I'm very happy to be here.
Wow, that's such a rich experience. And well, a trivia, Kevin. What do the three of us have in common? we're all engineers turned lawyers. So
Nice.
Electrical engineering here again, Kevin.
yeah,
That is-
electronics a little different, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's helpful. I tell people who are looking to get into technology law that it can be a two-edged sword. You have to be very careful if you have an engineering degree not to assume too much. And when you graduated from college with that engineering degree, it was already outdated. So unless you're a lifetime learner and you're constantly learning new things and focusing on learning about the new technologies, it's not any use to you. It helps with terminology and all that, and being able to know the lingo and maybe get a little bit of a head start. But anyone who's smart, anyone who's curious, your background is just fine for getting into the same things that I've done. In fact, sometimes it will help you to not have as many blinders that somebody with the engineering background might have on.
Right. And this is something also which I, keep telling people, lawyers especially, not coming from a technology background, is that, learn the technology. Law you're learning in school, right? How to apply law to the technology is something that you learn. All right. So with that, I think we can get into the discussions which everyone is eagerly waiting for. So, Kevin, shall we start with the fundamentals of technology transaction with respect to AI?
Yeah, sure. I think what I always tell people is, and I had a slide deck prepared, but I didn't quite finish it. So those of you who are interested, hit me up afterwards in LinkedIn or messages or whatever, and I'll send you a copy of what I have. I had this cute little puffin that was taking one step, and to kind of talk about how you kind of have to take these things one step at a time. And I think the first thing, whenever you're evaluating any technology and thinking about how you license it and what the terms should be and what the issues are, is to understand it. And so I went out and asked AI about itself. I know a lot of this myself, but I thought, what better source than AI to ask, what it's about and what models do and how they work. And in particular, one of the things that you're going to start to see, if you haven't already seen it in some of the licenses or some of the discussions out there, are discussions about weights. Weights are what basically models are comprised of, is levels of essentially, if you think about your brain and neurons, you're modeling a neural network, and you're you're creating these weights between the layers that tell how much the input from one layer changes to the next. And so what the output when you have a model is a series of weights, numbers essentially. And so fundamentally, when you look at some of the open source licenses, some of the cutting edge stuff, you'll see discussion more of weights than treating it like software. So I would encourage anyone who really wants to dive into and understand how models work and how AI works, to really do that first before you start thinking about the issues. It helps in a couple different ways. When discussions about data come up, and is this going to eat my data? Does it need my data? Well, once you've trained a model, while you're training a model, data helps, and different types of data can help in training the model. But once the model is built, does it really need new data to keep the model up and running? No. And so your data is not that important for it to keep up and running. Your data can help hone it and make it better. But it's not necessary. So when you think about when someone says we absolutely have to have your data, that's not true. They don't absolutely have to have your data unless they're using your data to build the model in the first place. And the second place it comes into play is when you're building or when you're honing a model, and you find a piece of data or a question or a image or something like that just breaks the system. This happened when I was at Amazon, as we were building out the systems for Amazon Go, the computer vision systems. Every now and then, some combination of people walking by each other, reaching hands around each other, reaching up to a shelf, would break the system. It just would go. It wouldn't. The system wouldn't know what to do with it. And then we would try to figure it out. We would train the model some more and get it to fix it so that it wouldn't fail with that same scenario. And when we ran that data through it again, ran a video of the person doing the same thing through again, it wouldn't fail. We would want to hold on, the engineers would love to hold on to that original video, that original data, so that if they fix something else down the road, they could test and make sure it didn't re-break this thing that they had already fixed. And so there may be times when you get asked in a licensing scenario to allow the other party to hold on to some of your data for purposes of troubleshooting their own models. And it can be very useful. So when they say that that's what they want to do, there are scenarios in which that is something legitimately that people do with data. Once you've got a working model, something breaks it, you want to figure out and make sure that that same thing never breaks it again. So that's a scenario where data may be held on to. But I would encourage everybody, go out, ask Claude, ask ChatGPT, ask them about how models work, ask them about weights, ask them about neural networks, and get your mind kind of wrapped around how this all works. And that will help you in terms of how you structure agreements and structure terms about licensing.
Fantastic, fantastic. I mean, when we were discussing about how to basically structure this whole discussion, I mean, this is the immediate question came after that. When developing an AI, when building an AI, what are the kind of licensing conditions, the considerations that comes to your mind? And if you could explain to the viewers as to what are those considerations, what are the things that they should keep in mind when they are essentially developing an AI, utilizing it internally, externally, so on and so forth. Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, when you're developing an AI, I mean, one of the obviously the things that you need to do that are data, lots of data. You might be making just a text-based large language model. You're using as much text as you can to run through the model and train it and how words go together. If you're doing a multimodal, then you're talking images, possibly video. It's a lot of data. So those, you're going to have to figure out how you get that data, where it comes from, the licensing terms that apply to it, how you can use it. There are lots of different sources out there. And you also have to be aware now, and it may not be just the United States, but it may be other governments that start to do this and start to limit data transfer for purposes of building models to nations that they consider their competitors or their enemies, just like the Biden executive order from yesterday or the day before, I forget which day. So you have to be mindful of the data provenance. You need processing power, a lot of processing power. So you're going to have deals, in place with the Oracles, NVIDIAs, Amazons, Microsofts of the world to get the processing power, the GPU clusters that you need to actually train using all this data. And it takes time, and it's a lot of money too. Their issues aside from that, aren't super different, in terms of developing a model as composed, developing any other type of any type of product. I think there's probably, because of the size of the dollars involved, you may find yourself in a joint development scenario, or a scenario where you're being funded by a partner, and then you have to start thinking about similar terms to joint developments. Early on in my career, I was involved with, I got the chance to work on something completely outside of my technical wheelhouse, which was pharmaceutical development. And those deals are massive, hundreds of millions of dollars, perhaps billions of dollars invested over a long development cycle. And so those deals are very complex, and they think a lot about how the parties are going to work together and how they're going to share the intellectual property. I think where you're talking about the size of dollars that you are with respect to developing AI models, you probably look to some of those agreements and some of those constructs that they use to, joint development committees, You think about what each party is contributing, what rights each party has in the output. Do you territorial divide? Do you divide by, some sort of market areas that each of you gets exclusive rights in, or there's lots of considerations there for the development aspects of it. So when you're thinking about licensing in a development scenario, you're thinking about the deals. They could be quite complex because of the dollars and the time that it takes to develop these models.
I mean, Kevin, I mean, one question that comes immediately to my mind is what happens? I mean, how do we deal with the IP ownership situations in these kind of joint development kind of models? If you could throw some light there.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this. I mean, you can um, so it depends. I mean, you always look at like what does each party want in a scenario. Someone may want access just to the model. Someone may want to use it. In our case, we use foundational models behind the scenes, and so it's really our business is more going to be the agent, the back office deals that we do to have the agents that need to be powered by model. But do we need to have do we need to go and license the model to other parties and make a business out of that? Maybe not. So you think about what each party wants to get out of it and try to structure a deal where each one is getting that. You may decide to divide up between consumer and enterprise. That may be one structure to structure. Hey, you get to make this available to consumers. You get to embed or power devices with this, and we get enterprise. There can be any number of ways to sort of slice up ownership of the resulting model, the resulting weights out of it. You have to think about when you're doing joint development also like ongoing maintenance and costs, as well as like who's going to own the patents and who's going to maintain the patents if you're filing for those along the way. How are you going to maintain trade secrets? There may be some things that you don't want to patent. There's some trade secrets about how you've gone about training the model that you don't necessarily want to get out. The thing is, this is a very highly academic area too, and so you have to think too about the engineers and the teams that you're working with who are used to being possibly in academia and publishing, and so you need to think about getting a patent process in place to capture disclosures before they get published, before they get shared, gleefully with a broader academic group. I think there's definitely a lot of excitement from researchers, and they do like to, hey, look, we just made this improvement by this. So you have to make sure if you're in-house or you're a law firm and you're advising companies, really get them thinking early about how to protect intellectual property, not necessarily so they can use it to go and create a licensing program, but just so they have some defensive patents to use for themselves as well.
So on that, Kevin, just sticking to the topic of joint development, would you think that liabilities would also be a consideration here, where one party is bringing a background intellectual property, right? Probably the coding is done by another party. How do we really handle these situations, and what should be the considerations?
Yeah, I think you're going to have. I mean, it won't be different than I think most other sort of joint development scenarios where you're each bringing background technology to the party, and I think you indemnify each other to the extent that any of that background technology is infringing. I think with respect to the moving forward, um, you know, both parties probably in this scenario is slightly different in that now you're bringing this data that you're training the models with, and it's still an open question out there. It's not in my mind per se, but it's an open question out there in the courts as to whether or not training on data that you have scraped or that you've gotten from other sources or from a book or something like that is an infringement. And so I think that the parties probably try to address that as much as they can. Up front, who's going to cover this? Will we jointly cover, possible infringement? And my apologies, I'm going to move over slightly to avoid the sun being in the background there. There we go. I was not expecting sun in San Francisco this morning.
Well, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's that. I think you're going to think about it a lot of the same ways, but data is going to be one where you have to you might have to come to an agreement as to what level of filtering, what level of risk that you are collectively want to take with respect to the data that you use to train the models. Um, one of the challenges, one of many challenges there is a lot of data that comes from the web, Reddit, Wikipedia, all of this that may include personal information, and that's obviously sensitive. If you think about the new EU AI Act, the provenance of your data is going to be important there, especially if you're in a high risk scenario where you're making an AI that might be used in a decision making about people's lives in some way. That hits it in the high risk area. So you're going to have to have tracked your data provenance. You're going to have to have scrubbed it for personal information as well. The other thing too, is just I think that everyone should be aware of, and we're all trying to avoid, is the internet's a horrible, horrible place, and if you scrape the internet for data, you're going to get child sexual abuse material and things like that are horrible. And there are organizations like Thorn out there that have tools that allow you to run hashes and find that stuff and delete it from your data. So I think that partners, when they get together, are likely going to set some hurdles that they want to cross over, some things that they want to do with the data before it goes into the pool and gets used to create a model that they then jointly own or license each other on.
Okay. I mean, that's very helpful. I mean, and becomes very essential for councils while or product councils while they are advising their customers, whether that be internal or external.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, what are the various ways in which AI can be used by an organization, and can you explain the various licensing models there?
Yeah, I mean, there are any number of ways, right? I think organizations now are just starting to tap into and plumb the possibilities of using AI. I was at a dinner last night with a group and just talked about how uh, one of the conversations was about how there's a prevailing thought that AI is going to make us less human, but in some ways, when you're using it to add a more human touch to a rejection letter, for example, or a no, and rather than a blunt no, someone's getting something crafted by an AI writer that is, I appreciate the effort. You've shown again and again you're great, but this isn't the right time. That comes across a lot better, and that's a lot more human. It's a lot more empathetic, and that's an AI. And so I think we're going to find there's lots and lots of different ways within the organizations. Within the legal field, I consider right now to be basically a very high-end search, a super-powered search that delivers an answer that is almost, if you prompt it the right way, almost good enough to be considered like a first pass by junior attorney. And so I think that you're going to find, co-pilots. And Microsoft just announced yesterday a co-pilot in the finance side. You're going to find them for legal and for other areas as well. So, and then there's the back office sort of thing that you're going to find agents doing. So there's a lot of different things that I think businesses are going to find uses for. Right now, I think most of it is going to be based on the cloud. You're going to have, um, an AI offering from a third-party vendor that's based in the cloud. Um, you Right now you can, in some cases, have it run on your own instance. Glean is a good example of this, where if you've ever used it, which is a fantastic um, kind of search engine for your company. It looks at everything on your Google Drives, everything across the company, indexes it, and it's a great search with some. But then it also has an AI functionality where you can also ask it for that agreement that you have in a repository. When does that expire? And it'll actually tell you using OpenAI to power the analysis of that contract. So that's one example of a tool that it runs in the cloud, but you can have them run it on your own instance. So it's isolated and your data is all within this instance and an S3 container that's your own. So that's what you see now. In the future, some of this may get to the point where the models are compact enough that a powerful enough model can run locally, and you can run it on your desktop or even your phone or something like that. There are some models now, I think, that you can find on Hugging Face that will run on an M3 laptop. So we're just brushing the surface of what's possible, I think, right now in the business world with these. The licensing models, are going to be very similar. I mean, you're going to. Because I've been evaluating this in part of what the offering that we'll be offering at Adept, and I think that you'll see cloud services types agreements that have a few minor modifications to account for the AI, but are largely very similar and something um, that you are familiar with. So I don't think there's going to be a large change to licensing from inbound licensing from that perspective. But there are some minor modifications, and you'll see them in some of the licenses we'll talk about in just a bit. Yeah.
I mean, if we could get into if what are the kind of models which we are now seeing, like the open source licensing models which are coming
Yeah.
up, and then the proprietary licensing models. I mean, how are these? I mean, how are these shaping up, Kevin? And then, I mean, I would
Yeah.
be very interested to understand, like, what are the kind of considerations when these licensing models are there for a third party AI that we take and would want to integrate or use within the organization, or
Hmm.
integrate it with the product which the organization wants to sell outside. I mean, what's
Yeah.
happening there?
Yeah. Okay. So there are, and I'm going to give a shout out to a few people here because there have been people who've been thinking about AI and licensing AI for some time, and some of them are past colleagues. Jenny Lee, and I don't have the whole list of folks who've worked on the Rail license. It's a series of research-related licenses for ethical licensing of AI. Um, and there's a variety of those that you can choose from. They're very well thought through, and they're really meant. Those ones are meant for researchers who want to share their models, want to share their research in a way that the downstream licensee is bound, ethically not to do certain things with the models. And so, and those have been around. I don't have a precise date, but it's been quite a while that they've had those out there. So hats off. There have been people really thinking about this for a while. Um, Bond Terms. They're a company that is among other things, creating sort of standardized agreements that are very down the middle and a platform for executing those with third parties really easily with very little negotiation. But one of the things they came up with a committee of various experts was the Bond Terms AI licensing model. And so I'd encourage anybody to go take a look at that because it's very well done, and it's not verbose, it's not super long, but it really hits sort of the basics of what you're considering. I think there's one thing that will probably get added into that. So the bond terms agreement or the license terms address intellectual property ownership of the inputs um, to it. So your prompts, for example, or the documents you upload, the images you upload into the system, who owns those, how are they licensed, can they be used to further train the model, all of that. And there are kind of options you can choose as a licensee or licensor as to, and so it's really useful for building out your own model. And I've used it a couple times for various companies to just structure and drop right in for the IP ownership and licensing of the AI pieces. It also addresses your output. Who owns the output? How can it be used? What are the restrictions around that? Are there, and then ties into an acceptable use uh, addendum, which is very useful too, to say, hey, you can't use this AI to do things that are illegal, all the sort of things you'd expect in acceptable use. So that's a really good resource and a set of terms that anyone can use to start their own. The other, and again, another shout out. Years and years back when I was a junior associate at Wilson Sonsini, one of the projects I worked on with a senior associate was a survey of all of the open source licenses that existed, or at least the varieties and types, and a nice spreadsheet of what the rights were and what you could do with it and whether it was viral or not. And that was Heather Meeker, who went on from there to become, I think, one of the world's kind of foremost experts in open source. She has worked with some other folks to create an open weights license that is essentially an open source version of for models, and that really kind of goes to the fundamental aspects of them. Their weights. Are you licensing those out on an open source? What are the restrictions and rights that you have with respect to that model and modifying it at that level? So it doesn't necessarily include license rights to training data and things like that. And that's one of the things that like a rail license or your own crafted license might get at. If you're getting a model and you're wanting to modify it somehow, you may want access to the training and the fine tuning data to be able to continue to train it beyond where it's at. And that's not addressed, I don't think, by open weights. And then there's also, well, there isn't one. The common license, common Creative Commons, which Heather's also involved with. They came out and said, we don't think you need a license. We think one of our existing ones works just fine for those things that are copyrightable about AI, and for those things that aren't, you don't need a license. So we don't need to change anything, add anything, just use the CC0 license, and that should work for you. So there are good resources out there for you to use, either to directly use to license a model in or AI, or to craft your own from. Embedding is interesting. Glean's a good example here, where they have used OpenAI and ChatGPT for that AI functionality within their product offering, and they basically punt and say, "Look, all this stuff is being handled by OpenAI. They're very visible and transparent that like they're passing it off, and they're actually going to be the data controller. We're just a pass through here on this part of it, and they're the controller, not us. And here you go. You've signed up to their terms for this. We're just the ones that are paying the bill for you." For the cycles that get used to process your queries and stuff. So and there are others. I think you'll start to see people building models in that are not transparent, like it's just behind the scenes. It's a wrapper, and yeah, it's good. I haven't really thought through too much about whether that means that you have to really change license terms. You do have to think about what if you're using OpenAI, how do their terms work, and do I need to build my terms to have the flow through rights that flow through and match up with what they are asking for and with what they give back with respect to the outputs. I would say that OpenAI has some restrictions on uses of outputs that you'd probably want to include in yours. to say, look, because you don't want to be in a situation where you have a deal with OpenAI that says you're going to pass through terms and then you don't, and you have some liability to them because someone's out there using the model in a way that, or using the outputs in a way that violates OpenAI's terms. So I think, yeah, always, just like any other product where you embed a third party's component or a third party's code, you're just going to have to think a lot about how you pass through the terms that they're insisting to get passed through.
Right. I mean, and just to give see, most of our viewers who are going to listen to this podcast, or who are listening to this podcast, they will want a starting point as to when they want to advise on to what are the kind of licensing terms to build in when a model, say AI model, is going to be licensed out. So I mean, what we spoke about is, if you have to create, say, a proprietary license model, proprietary license term, bond terms is a very good starting point.
Yeah.
And if it has to be an open source, license model, then open rail, open weights are really good starting point.
Yeah.
Now, before closing this discussion, if you could tell what are the considerations, irrespective of whether it is an open source or whether it is proprietary. I mean, what are the kind of concerns that are there with any of these kind of licensing model, if you could maybe briefly touch upon that?
Yeah, I think regardless of the model, you're gonna be interested in the data and how it's handling data, and how the company that you're utilizing or partnering with is handling it. Are they SOC 2 compliant? What does their DPA say? Do they have a DPA? Do they have sub processors who are also processing your data? At former places, I've had, um, sometimes people don't value the data that they do have within an organization. There are a lot of startups out there who are trying to create interesting products using AI, and I think you have to be aware of the privacy laws when someone approaches you and says, "Hey, I've got this idea for a great tool that would help your business a lot. If you would, share with me some of your customer data, I would use it to create this tool that would then greatly benefit you." You have to look at your own. I think one of the things to start with is looking at your own policies and agreements with your own customers. Most people I know, or most companies I know, their privacy policies probably are fairly broad, and they say, "Hey, we can use your data, our customers' data, to develop and improve our own products." They don't necessarily say that you can give it to a third party to build and develop their products, though. And even if they did, doing that under California law would probably be considered a sale under CCPA. And now you've gotten yourself in a situation where you've got to comply with a lot of the requirements there. We sell data, make it very clear to customers, and let them opt out, and all of this. So understanding your own terms, understanding how you're going to engage with a third party, I think is incredibly important as a starting place for dealing with AI, because of the fact that that it is data. You're talking about data flowing through these. I think. I think other than that, like I don't really see. I mean, there's not a huge amount of difference between licensing here and licensing elsewhere, and I think that's um, the my bottom line is that most things are very similar. There's only a few additional things to consider here when you're talking about AI, and a lot of those get surfaced when you understand how AI works. So.
Okay. So Kevin, changing gears a bit, could you tell us about, what are the due diligence requirements when, let's say, a company acquires, an AI product, right? Has to integrate it within their systems, or has a product idea. But during the acquisition or before the acquisition, what are the due diligence? If you could just like briefly touch upon those.
Yeah, yeah. If you're buying an AI company or selling an AI company, I mean, data provenance is obviously one of those areas that you're going to care a whole lot about. You're going to care about looking at the agreements that the party have and thinking through, how they've structured ownership of the model, how they've structured rights in the inputs. Um, uh, what I was going to add with respect to the bond terms and that you might start to see when you see agents is the conversation about observations, because one of the things um, that an agent needs is to understand the workflow, and that's usually done through some sort of observation um, of a screen, a window, how somebody's moving their mouse around. So there may be like an observation, term that you see in these agreements, and you need to think about how inputs and observations are used, licensed. There's new compliance obligations, obviously EU AI Act, and there's probably bound to be some more coming down the pipeline. California CCPA, California Privacy just announced yesterday that they're considering some additional things in the AI scenario. So you've got to keep your eye out for any new regulations that pop up and make sure that you're compliant with it, and existing privacy laws. There may be export controls. We saw with the Biden, executive thing. There's sort of a consideration now that some of these AI could be dual use technologies. That was when we were developing Amazon Go, um, and we realized like the ability to track something in three-dimensional space to a very fine degree, to know whether somebody took something off the shelf or whether the person went right or left. That same technology could have a dual use in weapon systems, and so we were very mindful that there may be some restrictions on export that wouldn't allow us to say export it to a particular country where we might have engineers that could develop it. We might have decided not to do that because of the potential dual use. So be aware that I think this is only the start of it being considered dual use. And we're going to see some new models coming out in the next year, probably blow our collective mind. I mean, we've still only scratched the surface of what GPT-4 and Mistral and some of the others can do. Those companies haven't stopped. They're working on the next generation that's going to blow our minds, and those ones most certainly will probably be considered dual use. You're going to look, I think, when you're buying a company or when you're selling it, what their security position is. Are they SOC 2 compliant? Have they gone through that whole process? Do they access controls? Who can access that model? And is it locked down so that it hasn't had any weird things, behind the scenes added to it? I think on the selling side, you're going to have to deliver, documentation showing, your ownership and the provenance again of the data, licenses for third-party software that you used in developing and that might be embedded within your overall solution. Let's see. Yeah, so those are some of the top ones, top of mind. I think it doesn't go without saying, I'm going to say it, as you're building these models, depending on what type of model you're building, I think you need to keep in mind fairness and ethics, especially if you're thinking of deploying the EU, and making sure that the model is that you've done audits on it to make sure that it's not making decisions that are unethical or biased in some way. Let's see. If you're buying, you're going to ask for any details of past security breaches or incidents. You're going to look for any third-party dependencies in development. What tool sets and things like that are necessary. yeah, that's I think my whole list. I'm sorry, I'm looking down. I've got some notes here. But yeah, that's among some of the lists that you're gonna want to look for. You
Uh,
might actually even ask for like model performance validations. So someone might say our model is great, it's better than ChatGPT 4. You know, what benchmarks are used for that? Who tested it? What are the ways in which you can document that? Um, and you might ask for post consumer and customer feedback as well, as you're buying a company like that.
Yeah, I mean,
I am.
fantastic insights. Just one thing that we keep mentioning, that there's a lot of issue, and we need to be careful as to how the input data has been licensed, where the data was acquired, how it was acquired. Is there any best practice? Because I see a lot of models have been trained on Common Crawl, right? And that could be like anything, right? That's just like thousands of websites which have been crawled. Though they keep saying that it's just a sample set. However, they keep refreshing it after a certain time period.
Yeah.
Is there a best practice or some standard which is developing with respect to acquisition of the data?
I don't know that there's an industry best practice yet about it. I think that everyone is, especially with the EU AI Act, especially with questions about bias in the models and all of this, and the recent kind of misfire of Gemini with respect to its visual outputs. Um, People are mindful that they need to be careful with respect to the data, and also like the any sort of pre-customer sort of prompts that you might give. And someone else, like I saw today or last night, had managed to get Gemini to spit out what looked like its sort of pre-prompt that it might have gotten from Google, and it was very interesting. There was nothing sort of controversial, but I think you have to be mindful that and do that stuff right. There's no, with respect to the data, I think everyone is, there's probably across the board, no one wants anything um, that is illegal in their materials, any child sexual abuse material, um, anything like that. They want filtered out, and the common crawl and other things it could potentially pick up stuff that just horrible stuff from the internet. So aside from filtering, um, you know, you also want to be careful. I mean, Reddit's licensing, apparently they're going to license out, Reddit. There's probably some subreddits that they're excluding from that, because if you trained on all of Reddit, you would probably get a bot that just swore and said horrible things to you and was abusive. So I think people are mindful that sometimes, you have to be thoughtful about the data sets that you're using and what's in those, and it could really color the outputs for you. It's interesting to me, and being here, and then amid models being built, that as you're training it, sometimes the model just skips over, rejects some of the training data. It says, I'm not going to use this. So I think people lean toward more and more data, because some of it will get neglected, some of it will skipped over, but no common, as far as I know, sort of industry-wide um, standards yet. Again, they'll gel more as we see more regulation, and people think, well, hey, I want to create a model that can be used by a government for making decisions, and gosh, now I've got to, because of the EUI Act, it's a highly risk area. I've got to have really good tracking on my data provenance and all my data. I've got to be able to explain how this made decisions. Again, I don't really know how that's going to work for somebody, because they really are like a human brain, a bit of a black box to some degree, and you might not get the same answer out of an AI twice, just like you might not get the same answer out of a person. So that's the part of the EUI Act that has me a little flummoxed, how you can actually show how it got to a result. But as people struggle with those sort of things, I think there will be more standards around what sort of data you are willing to use for different types of models, and need to use for different types of models.
Kevin, I think um, one question that we want to understand, and then we want to also get a sense of how would it work. I mean, you just spoke about that there are these different upcoming sort of considerations, issues with respect to selling of AI. um, but what happens when someone were to start selling AI for government? So governments across the world are also utilizing or using AI as much as they can. Some of the
Yeah.
governments starting slow, but we can already see interest, at least from say an India perspective. We can see that various departments are figuring out way of using AI, and I'm pretty sure that a similar kind of thing is happening in countries like US, in various countries of Europe as well. Now, if you could say tell from say a US perspective, what are the kind of considerations when someone were to sell an AI to the government? What what should be the considerations there?
Yeah, and the UK just announced that they're considering using it to summarize laws and things like that. So just a baby step, but I mean it is definitely something that's interesting. I think for governments, I mean, whenever you're selling and licensing to governments, you've got to look at like the FARs, DFARs, and some of the other um, things about selling into governments. Procurement regulations are obviously something. Um, Data security and privacy. They may actually ask too um, you know, for possession or an escrow of the model or something like that as well in connection with it. You've got to be, FISMA is something to be aware of, the Federal Information Security Management Act, possible state level laws that are similar to. Um, so you may have privacy and data security requirements that actually exceed those in the commercial world because of you're selling into government. Transparency and explainability, there's going to be a higher bar there probably for those that you're licensing in for the government to use. Um, there might be actually additional scrutiny on the ethical implications of using AI. Government contracts might have unique terms on the IP ownership too, so you have to structure your licenses so that you're giving them proper licenses without giving out too many rights. Um, yeah, there might be the dual use, depending on how it's being used, um, or even the power of it. It could be export controlled and something that, and also, I think, there's also the just general. If you're a corporation, how do you feel about, licensing your AI to, a government agency for doing things that you might not feel are acceptable, right? You may not want your AI to go into a drone that is, targeting immigrants, in some way or something like that. So I think that's your own ethical decision about whether or not you're going to license to a government. Um, they may put interoperability standards too in place to be able to sell into governments, and so you may have some additional work to make your product interoperable. And they may actually require some accessibility um, above and beyond what's required by commercial. Um, let's see. One other thing too, and I think that it's gonna be interesting to see how it plays out. Are performance guarantees, especially when you get to agents and things that are powered by models. Um, how accurate are they? Right now we'll have like server uptime and stuff in SaaS licensing. You're probably also going to have an accuracy, like maybe it misses one record out of 100, 99%, but people are probably going to insist on 99.9, which is probably much better than a human operator in terms of data movement and back office operations. But I think those are additional things that you might start to see in agreements for AI is some sort of performance guarantees on the performance of the system that is utilizing the model.
That's very interesting. I mean, to think of it, I mean, this I think is a very key insight, that we are going to see a performance guarantees being required, where the AI doesn't just perform but also perform in a manner which is consistent, essentially going through each of the data, not missing any of the kind of inputs. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So I think we will just have time for one more question. And Devarshi, if you could go ahead.
Yeah, I think Kevin, broadly you've covered most of it. I know it's a huge topic, and we can drill down into each of these. But as something to probably conclude or summarize, is there any additional considerations, right, for a technology lawyer, or someone who's working with AI as an in-house counsel or as a product counsel? Uh, can you think of any other considerations that the counsel should keep in mind?
Other than what we've spoken about, no. I think it's hard to wrap your mind around how this stuff works, and I think once you've spent a little time doing that, it isn't radically different than a lot of other things. If you think about it in terms of what goes in, what comes out, the observations the system might make, and then just break down licensing with respect to those things, I think that you will get it right. I have, and feel free, anyone who's listening and is on LinkedIn, to reach out to me. I have an outline for this discussion that's like 7 pages long. So there is a lot in terms of just little considerations here or there, but it's not. If I were to create an outline for licensing normal SaaS or something like that, it would be probably 6 pages. So it's not appreciably more. Again, I think what really helps, as well as understanding the technology, is look at the work that were done by the sort of the folks that I've mentioned, Jenny, Heather, and others who created the Open Rail, the Open Weights, the Creative Commons licenses. They've done a lot of thinking about what the terms should be and what issues are there. And again, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. They've done a lot of the heavy lifting. Um, and having licensed this stuff and having looked and helped people find data sets and stuff for things like robots and all that in the past, I think those are really a lot of the stuff we talked about, data provenance and how you're getting it, whether it's real data, synthetic data, how you're using it. Those are the unique questions in AI space. But there aren't a lot of them. There aren't a crazy amount of them. So I wouldn't be intimidated by licensing AI. I would just look at those resources and dive into them and start at it.
So I think I think to sum up such a to be so to say a tough kind of a, I mean, complicated sort of a topic within an hour is never easy, and we are extremely grateful. We could systematically break it down
Yeah.
into what are the kind of requirements when someone were to bring in an AI model within an organization. What are the kind of considerations when someone were to use those AI models to develop their own products, then go on to sell these kind of AI models, and then if someone were to go ahead and buy a company which is developing these AI models, or to sell a company when they have developed AI models, and then sell AI to government. So each of these considerations, and for our viewers, um, Kevin has been Kevin has been super. We are so grateful to Kevin that he has also built an outline of how this whole licensing considerations will work. And for anyone who is interested, we would be very happy to share across the outline, and you can very well go out straight away, reach out to Kevin to have further discussions about the outline as well.
Yeah,
So
and I am working on from that outline, building out a presentation with some slides and stuff. I'll probably finish that in the next few weeks. And so, for anybody who wants to see what the presentation would have looked like had I finished it in time, then I'm happy to send that along as well.
Well, I mean, can't thank you enough, Kevin. And I can already see in our chats we have our fellow viewers already thanking you for all the insights that you have brought to table.
Well,
I would like to hand over for one short closing note to Debarshi before we part ways. Debarshi, please.
Yeah, I mean, nothing much. I mean, this was such an amazing session, Kevin. Really appreciate your time, and your insights into this really complex topic. Um, you know, and this is we would want you to be a part of our journey where we unravel AI as it as it develops further. So thank you so much, and for the viewers, please keep checking our LinkedIn page. We will come up with these new topics. Hopefully these would be interesting to you. Just as a a short end note, we would like to extend our sympathy to all the people affected in the Rameshwaram Cafe Blast in Bangalore. Um, but yeah, otherwise, thank you so much, Kevin. And with that, bye
Thanks.
bye. Have a great weekend.
It's a wrap. Thank you very much, Kevin, and
yeah, no problem.
viewers. we are going to we are going to come back again live on 22nd of March. Please look forward to another discussion on technology contracts and how dispute resolutions are supposed to be handled for technology contracts. So see you there again. Thank you
Okay.
very much, Devarshi. Thank you
Thank
very much,
you.
Kevin. All
Thank
of you
you.
guys have a nice day and good
Thank you.
night.
You too.
Bye bye.
Thank you.